We start today with the number 75. This is the number of ambush attacks which have happened on American police officers in 2021. Now, this is up 103% from the previous year, including the latest officer in Baltimore, who is currently on life support following the early morning attack on Thursday while he was sitting in his police cruiser. Now, in all, 93 officers have been shot in ambush attacks alone, with 21 losing their life. That number is added to the overall number of 44 officers who have been killed by gunfire, which is almost 20% of the 241 officers who have been shot just in 2021. Yet outside of local media, rarely is any attention actually given to these violent situations. Definitely nowhere near the amount we find when bad cops make bad decisions. In fact, recently, the only time you hear a police officer's name mentioned, especially on the national scene, is if he did something wrong or he was killed in the line of duty. Neither one is a positive. Now, there is one reason I believe why these assaults are happening, and it's because the respect for law enforcement is at an all-time low. But while demonization of the police is nothing new in pop culture, as pro-violence against police lyrics and songs actually dates back decades, what is new is elected officials actually joining in the chorus and belittling or demoralizing an entire industry which is tasked with keeping their community safe.
Yes, I support the defund movement.
A big part of this conversation really is about reimagining how we do public safety in America, which I support.
Not only do we need to defund, but we need to dismantle and start anew.
Why use the word defund? Why use the word defund? And it's like, this is the word that's coming from the streets.
I don't want to see one more black man die at the hands of law enforcement.
Look, the reality is we can't rely upon the police to provide public safety.
So you have pop culture pushing an anti-police narrative, and it's now being reinforced by the supposed adults in the room. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to recognize this was going to be the result in hatred for law enforcement and some feeling even justified in their attacks. But here's where those in power are facing heat for their rhetoric, as those are the same elected officials who should be held responsible for encouraging this major divide between cops and their communities, which will bring us to our next number, 9. Sadly, the violence against police officers is not the only thing on the rise, as 9 major cities have already broken their previous homicide record, not to mention almost every major city has outpaced every category of crime from the previous year. Now, all 9 cities also share leadership, which belong to the same political ideology, and most have repeatedly continued to elect Democrat leadership at the top and throughout City Hall, despite the failed attempts to curtail crime. Now, an easy example of this is Chicago. Under the leadership of Mayor Lori Lightfoot, the city has already had 812 people murdered, which makes 2021 the most violent year in a quarter century, but is only slightly higher than years past. In fact, the last time there was a Republican mayor of the Windy City, that was in 1931. But Chicago is not the only one, as homicides in all major cities have become so much the norm, we in the media rarely report on them. And when the media no longer considers a loss of life worthy of something more than a 30-second soundbite, then you know our priorities in this country are wrong. But what is also wrong is the same city leaders, who all happen to be Democrats, were quick to jump on the defund the police bandwagon. Don't realize those are the same wheels which are carrying victims of violent crime to their final resting place, as well as destroying the future of what cities' economic prosperity could be. But the high crime numbers are forcing some leaders to actually see their wrongs and try to fix. It is so bad in California, LA council members are actually redirecting funds from their own district to cover police overtime. And in San Francisco, the mayor is boosting police presence in drug dealing areas.
And it's time that the reign of criminals who are destroying our city, it is time for it to come. And it comes to an end when we take the steps to be more aggressive with law enforcement, more aggressive with the changes in our policies, and less tolerant of all the bull that has destroyed our city.
You can hear that passion in her voice. So make no mistake, this is not only about saving lives in their district, but it's also about saving their job. as New York City sent a direct message to their own party when they elected a former police captain as their next mayor. So will other Democrats actually continue to reverse course and do what they can to restore trust between their constituents as well as law enforcement? And will they hold their tongue and not call for such drastic reductions the next time there's a politically charged outcry against police? So let's ask our expert, Attorney Brock Lurie, who's authored Atheism Destroys.
Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, Brock, I've got to start off with this. You know, is the Democratic Party evolving, do you believe, on their stance on funding law enforcement with these new changes that we're seeing the leadership start to go towards?
Well, they seem to be evolving in some ways. They are operating on the margins. They're making changes at the margins, but they never seem to admit that they were wrong in the first place by saying defunding the police and saying that the police are bad and so forth. They can't ever possibly open up the past door and say, well, maybe we were really wrong on this. We need to reshift our whole outlook on everything else. No, they talk about the security guards and they're somehow responsible for this, so that Nordstrom's and otherwise, they're responsible for not making better security for the crime. And then, of course, for the police itself. It's everything except for their own policies, including COVID, right? So I don't think that they're evolving. What's evolving is only their arguments, their excuses. That's it.
Well, and I get that, but at the same time, you are seeing these changes, and I have to wonder, is this going to be permanent? Was this the wake-up call that was needed to make the changes necessary to make these communities safer?
Yeah, I do think that it is a wake-up call. It's getting so much attention at this point. I think a lot of Democrats didn't realize how bad this smash and grab phenomenon would become. We are now reaching what I call a Giuliani moment, meaning what happened when Rudy Giuliani became mayor in New York City. The city had gone so bad, the crime had gotten so horrendously in a horrific state that they had no choice but to give this crazy guy, Rudy Giuliani, a chance. And then he did indeed turn everything around. So God willing, there's going to be that sort of change in California and all these other big cities where we're seeing such a huge spike in crime and murder. So this is perhaps the moment that we just simply have to seize. It's just too bad that it has to get to this point that they actually decide to make a move.
Well, and Barack, I have to ask, you know, so many times, like you point out, a mayor can make a difference. And we looked at those, like the mayors and the councilmen, for the increase in crime to give us answers. But now you're finding out that we should actually put some blame on the district attorney. Do you agree with this?
Yes, of course. The district attorney is the ground troop who makes the major decisions as to who to prosecute and who to let go and what the level of crime is. He sends out the signal. So he's the one in charge. Ultimately, the district attorney, especially in Los Angeles, Gascon, for example, he's the one that I lay blame the most for allowing these criminals to be released, for encouraging no bail, for example, and otherwise setting a tone of forgiving criminals and demonizing cops. Yeah, so very much so.
Well, Barack, I want to thank you for joining us on this because, like I said, this is a very troubling issue that actually deals with people in Main Street. So many people in Washington, D.C., they forget that their policies actually have an effect. These ones actually do. Brock Lurie, author of Atheism. I apologize, I forgot. I just got the yes there. But Brock Lurie, thank you so much for joining us.
Atheism Destroys.
That's it.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me. All right.